couple of issues that everybody seems to feel very strongly about. So since we drew lots before we started, and Joann will be getting the first question, and then each of them, by the way, will get the same question. All right? We're not directing questions to any particular one. You'll both have a chance to answer both.
And it's 2 minutes to answer?
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right. Before I say that, I just got an email a few minutes ago from Kenichi Wilson. A lot of them, you haven't said anything, but he should have been here tonight also. But he sends his apologies, but for personal reasons, he could not be here tonight to participate in it. But he is also on the ballot for the same position. If you have any questions and you'd like to speak to him about it, he said just contact his campaign office. And I'd be glad to fill you in on whatever you want to know. Okay, question 1. Communities like Woodhaven, Richmond Hill, and Ozone Park have long become a forgotten zone when it comes to city services like sanitation, street repair. Our shopping districts are full of overflowing trash cans, household trash being dumped on corners. Conversations with the sanitation department in the past were fruitless. For example, their suggestion on how to handle overflowing trash cans on the corners of Jamaica Avenue was to remove the cans so people wouldn't have any place to throw the garbage. So this is what we're dealing with in the city. If you are elected, what will you do in the council to solve this type of a problem?
So this is a big problem. It's not just in this area, but throughout the district, especially in the business areas where we have people coming and putting their household garbage on the business strip and such. So luckily we have had council representation in both the 30th and the 23rd, where they were working with the bid, with the Department of Sanitation, and also funding not-for-profits like the Wildcats that employ people who were once incarcerated, people who once suffered with drug addiction, who come out and clean alternately when the Department of Sanitation cannot. We also then have community groups that go out. But is that really good enough? No. We need to replace the funding that's being squandered by the current city council and the mayor's office and put it back into agencies like the Department of Sanitation. We need to have extra pickups like we did have. We need to have the baskets that are enclosed so that they can't overflow and they can only go to so much. That doesn't stop people from putting garbage on the side, but certainly it is more of a deterrent. We need to make sure that the money at the city council level is being spent well. Councilmember Holden, which I have his endorsement, as well as Councilmember Ulrich, they have put their initiative money into Wildcats, into programs that assist business improvement districts, civic associations, and such to make sure that the areas are cleaned. Not just the business districts, but pop-up sites like where our bus lanes are that get filthy throughout, especially up here in Woodhaven where they're on the center mall. We need to have a strong voice in the City Hall that can get those services. I will work very hard, because I have worked very hard as a community leader and a civic association president, to make sure that we got extra baskets, to make sure that we got extra pickup. And so this is going to be natural for me to get to City Hall and say, I know what my district needs, I know what my neighbors need, I know what my small businesses need, and we need it now. And the fact that I would not be in the majority of the city council really doesn't have any effect, because we have a city council member who is a Republican who is very effective, continues to be very effective. Why? Because he has relationships. Now, when I get to the city council, God willing, and with your help, then I look forward to being part of a common sense caucus with Councilmember Holden and other council members that are there who are not in favor of cutting our basic services at the agencies, so that our quality of life can then return to the quality of life we deserve.
Felicia?
I recently, about a week and a half ago, put out a op-ed in Queens Courier. I welcome all of you to read it. It's called "You're Right, We Have a Trash Problem." And in that specific article, I'm calling to fully fund Department of Sanitation. What does it mean to fully fund a city agency? Really, what that looks like is making sure we're allocating a $100 billion budget in a way that helps communities that have less. Ozone Park, Richmond Hill, Woodhaven, South Ozone Park are all spaces within our community, and I'm so glad we can all agree, that are inequitably served, that have less trash cans. Literally, we have 158 total, maybe less today, because they get moved around. The other thing we need to think about too is having the conversation of the fact that, like, Ozone Park, for example, is called Ozone Park because of the wind that we have within the area, coming from the ocean, coming from south, moving up. We can't have open trash cans. Why? Because when you put garbage in the trash can, it's gonna blow out into the street. So we need to think about the type of trash cans we wanna put in our community and where and why. We need to make sure we're fully funding our sanitation department so they're working in the way to actually produce and build machines, those trucks that need to be updated in order to serve our communities better and employ our community members. The third way we can participate in making sure our neighborhoods are cleanlier is by employing people. You know, our city has a program called City Cleanup Corps, which I would love to see one of those, a set of our community members have one of those 10,000 jobs available in our city right now. New York City Parks Department also plays a role in how our communities are clean. They're the ones in charge of the rain gardens, actually. And currently they employ community members across our city for about $16 to $17 an hour. This is a type of employment we could really push for within our own community for people who need jobs at a higher rate as well if we're fully funding parks and DSNY. So these are the many ways in which we can help keep our communities clean, make sure we're funding sanitation, making sure the types of garbage cans we have in our communities make sense for the neighborhood, and then third, making sure we're employing our own community members so that they have a job in taking care of our neighborhoods. When people see that our own community members are working and getting paid to clean up our community, we think less about throwing something on the floor or dumping. We also need to teach people about why dumping is a problem. You do have community members or people from other neighborhoods who do dump like beds and microwaves and really odd things. A lot of people actually don't know who to call to pick up the microwave, the bed, or any other large object. So they tend to dump it because they don't know what else to do with it. Now, that's not an excuse, but we need to teach people on how city agencies work. Thank you.
Congestion pricing has been discussed for years, but it looks like it'll finally become a reality in the near future. If we want to drive into Manhattan, it will cost the average person anywhere from $23 to $36 just to get into the city. This money will then be put into the MTA's money pit. The mayor says this will reduce traffic in Manhattan. If elected, will you support this, keeping in mind how it will affect lower income people who drive taxis and delivery firms, like trucks? How would you modify the whole process to make it more acceptable to the average person?
I would not support congestion pricing, and because the reason is because we live here in the 32nd Council District. It is a transportation desert. So we are already overtaxed in our property taxes. We're already overtaxed and overburdened when we're going even onto the Rockaway Peninsula because of tolls. We have tolls at the bridges. We have tolls at the tunnels. We are really being overly taxed to just go into the city, whether it's to go to work or to see a play or to see a movie or to go to an event. We're already being overly taxed. That's number one. Number two is we don't really have a lot of access to the city by public transportation. So what we need to see is more express buses and more ways that we can get into the city before we could ever talk about congestion pricing. And yes, it is a burden to people who are in business, small business owners like truck drivers and or taxi cab drivers that have to go into the city. It does not make sense for the outer borough, especially this one. It does not make sense. We cannot, we have access to ride a bicycle route to Manhattan, but that is not really a way that our seniors or anyone with disabilities can get to Manhattan. We need to find better ways for us to travel to Manhattan via public transportation, ferry service, express buses that are not putting an extra burden, an extra tax. Everything they do at City Hall puts an extra tax on us, whether it's a street camera that's going off like a strobe light every time people are passing, or wanting to do congestion pricing. What they want to do is keep everyone out of Manhattan. But then what happens, those of us in the outer boroughs that are making our living in Manhattan, or have to drive into Manhattan to make deliveries? It is unfair, it is inequitable, and I would not support it.
Felicia.
Same 3 minutes for every question? Yeah, okay. So congestion pricing has actually existed for a long time, for at least 7 years or more now. And it's actually, as Steve said, the funding from congestion pricing actually goes to the MTA for a service like express bus service, for service for our bus, for our trains. Now, the reason why we have something called congestion pricing is not just to reduce traffic, it's actually to reduce air pollution in our city. Manhattan is so incredibly congested, just like Woodhaven, that folks are breathing in particles from the air into their lungs. That's the congestion. That is the cause of congestion. So the price is to help people make the decision not to drive, but to actually take the public transportation that we have. Now, how the public transportation that we have, that's another story. That's not this question. It doesn't work better to suit people who live in South Queens, like here in our neighborhoods. I would prefer a price that does not include those who work and drive in the city for a living. Now, most people from South Queens don't drive to Manhattan. We take the A train, or we take the J train, or we take the Manhattan Express bus. The data shows that it's not actually particularly people from Queens who are getting taxed this price or getting these having to pay this congestion price. Is actually people who work and live in the city and choose to drive. Yes, we have the exceptions of folks who might deliver products to Manhattan. And yeah, we need to make sure we're taking care of those folks, but the congestion pricing is to reduce air pollution and to make sure that folks are relying on public transportation. We need to improve our options for public transportation. We have the A train, we have the J train. They're not the A train at least is not as express as it could be. It still takes someone who lives in Far Rockaway at 45 minutes to an hour to get to Manhattan. We need to improve service in that way. There's a lot of infrastructure issues we have with the A and J train too. I don't know if you've walked up the J train platform, but you're afraid you're gonna fall through because of all of the rust we see just going up the stairs. We have 14 train stations, only 2 of them are accessible by elevator. A lot of this money that MTA seems to have is not going to South Queens. You need an advocate in City Hall who's going to be advocating for that. The other thing I want to make sure everyone's clear about is City Council's jurisdiction over MTA is also limited. MTA has more state level jurisdiction, so you should be pushing your state legislators to advocate for accessibility services and express services down here in South Queens. That's really important. I'm looking to work with them in doing just that.
As most of us here in this room know, e-bikes, ATVs, illegal dirt bikes, they become the scourge of the entire city. Especially here in Woodhaven and Ozone Park, we see tons of them. They terrorize the population by speeding, reckless maneuvers, riding on sidewalks, etc. Although the NYPD is doing their best to curb this bad activity, it's only making a small dent. How do you feel about enacting laws to force these people doing this to adhere to, as they say, the rules of the road, like car drivers have to do, and registering and licensing these types of vehicles? Joann.
Absolutely. Any motor vehicle, whether it be an ATV or an e-bike that is going to be on a road, should be registered. But you know what the problem is? They're not on the road, right? They're on the road, they're on the sidewalk, they're coming up onto your driveways, and they're driving recklessly through our parks, and they're causing a major problem. I was very encouraged as a civic leader. We have worked closely with the NYPD to make sure that this became a big issue. We kept meeting with the precincts to make them understand that this was not just e-bikes, kids on bikes that are popping wheelies on Woodhaven Boulevard and cutting you off in the lanes when they're supposed to be in the bike lane, but they're in the lanes of traffic, oftentimes coming towards you, coming against traffic. And I believe, as Steve said, NYPD is doing what they can do, and they're doing their best. We just had, I saw all over Facebook, and we had it in the 106, the 75 in Brooklyn, the 104 here, the 102. They're starting to confiscate those bikes, starting to confiscate those ATVs, starting to confiscate we'll even take it further, those loudspeakers that disrupt our sleep every night. But it has to go even further. We have to start talking about the cars with their mufflers. It's illegal. They have to start to enforce that. But how do we do that? We can't do that when the police force is at a minimum and not at its potential. We have to make sure that perhaps because it's such an enormous problem throughout the district, we need to have officers that are detailed just for that condition, to make sure that if we call in to our NCOs, 911, or to the precinct, that there is an absolute detail that comes out and takes care of that type of condition. We cannot live like this any longer. It must be addressed. People are calling at 3 in the morning saying that the music is playing loud. They're calling at 2 in the morning saying that mufflers and loud mufflers are going past their homes speeding, especially in the area of Equity Park. We need to help to be able to give our NYPD the tools they need to make sure that they can restore the quality of life. Make the arrest, make the confiscations. If I'm driving without my license and my car is not registered and I get pulled over, what's going to happen? The same should happen. I'm going to wind up, my car will be impounded and I can be arrested. The same should happen with these dangerous ATVs, e-bikes, bicycles that are being driven recklessly. But to do that, we have to have more enforcement in order to make sure that those conditions are addressed. They're illegal. And that's what the NYPD is for, to address illegal activity. That activity is illegal. And because of the pressure that the Woodhaven Residents Block Association has put on the PD, the Community Board 9, the BID, civic associations that have worked collaboratively, the NYPD is really starting to key into it and do these confiscations. And when the bikes and the ATVs are confiscated, they're crushed. They don't get them back. That's important.
Right crossing the street.
Right.
Felicia?
Yeah, no. ATVs and the dirt bikes and mufflers make a lot of noise. It makes you jump. It's definitely something incredibly, like, if you're sleeping and someone's speeding through with an ATV, it makes you jump in your sleep. So I totally relate to that. And that happens a lot often actually in the Pitkin Avenue area where there's no red light. It's just a whole bunch of stop signs. And so people just see this large space and they just zoom through. That's why I'm such a huge advocate of Vision Zero. You know, my opponent talks about like the senseless cameras. Those cameras actually save lives. And I know it sucks when you get a flash driving and you're following the rules and you get a ticket and not people who actually do speed, but it does help us reduce the amount of speeding we've seen in the district. Now, where does that money go from those cameras? That's something we need to advocate. It goes right back here in District 32, and that's something we need to be pushing for, absolutely. The second thing is I do think if folks are gonna choose, because that is their choice, to ride an ATV or a dirt bike, that it should be registered, so that way we can make sure that folks are doing things in a way that's safe for our community. You know, pedestrian safety is something we don't talk about. It's multi-layered. It has to do with the ATVs on the road, it has to do with dirt bikes, it has to do with speeding if you're in a regular car. It has to do with the ability to cross the street safely, especially as someone who might be elderly or disabled across our district. So this is why we need to make sure that we have Vision Zero in our community. We believe in that. And then two, that we are advocating on behalf of DOT, Department of Transportation, to come here and stop doing those studies. Oh, every time we have an issue with racing or noise, DOT comes here, they do a survey, and then they never tell the community again whether or not we're gonna get a stop sign, or we're gonna get a red light, or we're gonna get a speed bump. You know, all of these things help with pedestrian safety. You know, when we talk about ATVs, when we talk about dirt bikes, that has everything to do with pedestrian safety. Having them registered is one way we can reduce the amount we have on the road and on our sidewalks, just driving and speeding through freely. The other thing I want to us to think about is that these are also majority young folks who are on ATV and are on dirt bikes. And when young people have something else to do, they're gonna choose the thing that's gonna give them the most thrill. We've all been young before. And that gives them the most exhilaration. Is that an excuse for the choice of potentially putting people walking on the streets at harm? Absolutely not. But this is why I talk so much about community care and community wellness. When children and young people have something to do in their own neighborhood or where they live, like after school programs, like community development, like jobs and job training, they're less likely to do these extreme thrills of riding ATV bikes around our communities because they have something else to do. They're employed, they have responsibility. You know, that makes people feel valued. Right now, the thrill people are getting are by doing things that might be deemed dangerous as pedestrians, and it is. So making sure they're registered is definitely a step I'm willing to take.
Thank you. The mayor of New York recently announced the elimination of gifted and talented programs in our schools. Do you think this is a good or a bad move? And what would you advocate to allow for these gifted students to accelerate at a faster pace?
Okay. I think it's a terrible move. I think that gifted and talented programs in our schools are necessary. I think that screening schools are necessary. I think that programs for children who are students that are challenged when learning are necessary. I think that taking these programs away is almost telling a student who is accelerated and maybe kind of get bored in a class where they're ahead of the class that they shouldn't try to excel. They shouldn't try to strive for a goal to go to a school that has a program that perhaps is, pre-college programs. Every student is an individual. Every student should learn at their own rate. These gifted and talented programs do not stop our children from going to their local schools. In fact, they actually have to take a larger percentage of the children from the area that the school is in, the catchment area. Scholars Academy is one that is like that. They were a screening school, and they no longer are. There are often children and students that go to these schools that would maybe not have access to the type of college preparatory lessons that they do get in these schools, and then move on to colleges that they never could dream that they would be able to get into. We're doing our children a disservice by telling them that we're all the same, everybody learns the same, and there's no reason to strive harder. We should all be goal-oriented. It's what you do in your business, it's what you do in your life, it's what you teach your children. Try and do better, try and be better. So what is the mayor really telling kids? You don't have to try, because now we're going to do just pass or fail. Hardly, who's going to fail? We don't expect anything, therefore they will lose their enthusiasm to be better students. I don't want that to be the future of my grandchildren. I want them to be able to learn at the rate that they are capable of learning at. And to remove gifted and talented programs is taking that away. I think we need more. They should be in every school, so every child has the ability to do that. And as well as having IEPs in schools, in all schools, so that children who are more challenged when learning can feel comfortable and feel like they're doing well, instead of thinking, I just can't, I don't get it. Now, I've never been a teacher, but I've had to teach the kids at home as a parent when they came home with their classwork. And I've had two kids who were more accelerated, one not as much, but they were all in the right class, got the right education, and they're all successful people today. I want that same for my grandchildren. And I think the mayor is trying to do everything he can to destroy whatever is left of this city before January 1st. Thankfully, this will not go through until the next mayor is in the next city council. But when I'm there, that's a no vote for me.
Yes.
I'm glad to get this question as an educator. You know, the best thing we can give our kids is quality instruction and quality curriculum. That is the truth. Whether you're gifted or talented, or you're a student with disability, or however you learn, quality instruction and quality curricula is what every child has a right to. It doesn't happen equitably across the city. New York City is actually one of the largest, if not the largest, school systems in the nation, and also one of the most segregated. One of the systems that add to that segregation, just one of them, there are many, is the Gifted and Talented program. Now, for those of you who've never embarked on the gifted and talented trajectory, I'm not one of those students, but I do feel like I'm talented and gifted, is in kindergarten, you actually get tested for gifted and talented. In kindergarten. That means when you're 5 years old, someone sits you down, an adult, and they ask you a couple of questions, and they decide whether or not you can listen to directions and actually speak in full sentences. And that's how you get into gifted and talented. Literally, look it up. It's public information. Why is it that some students who speak in full sentences at the age of 4 and 5, and I don't know if you've ever raised a 4 or 5 year old, or you've been in a classroom with a 4 or 5 year old, it's really difficult to have a child sit down still, listen to directions, and speak in full sentences and be concentrated the whole time. And that's your chance in having a successful curriculum? Are you kidding me? No way. But that's added to the segregation within our school systems because it's pooled and pushed kids into one type of school and one type of instruction their entire year, and everyone else gets to fend for themselves. That's why a part of my education plan, and it's on my website at felicia2021.com/agenda, is a college and career team at every single high school in New York City. Now, what this college and career team would do is, no matter your circumstance, no matter your background, no matter if you're quote-unquote gifted and talented or not, or you have an IEP or not, you have a team of teachers and staff within your building, social workers, guidance counselors, who help you with the college or career process. Not everyone wants to go to college right away. That needs to be okay. That needs to be accepted in our society. For folks who don't want to go to college, they need to be able to be allowed into the world with a career pathway. Whether it's a union job that's going to provide prevailing wage, that's awesome. An apprenticeship, absolutely. A trade, absolutely. You should have that option. You shouldn't be sent out into the world if you didn't decide to go to college and left to fend for yourself at 18 years old. That's unfair. So we want to be able to provide that security for students at every single high school. That'll help start closing that gap. Now, something I also want to clear up is the mayor has more jurisdiction over schools than city council. So the mayor is able to then create this gift, eliminate or create and enact gifted and talented. That's why it's so important to figure out where is Eric Adams, or if Curtis wins. But which mayoral candidate is going to either reverse this or keep it? But I'm telling you right now that gifted and talented has added to the segregation of our school systems. Segregation is a real thing within our school systems. Our schools look different within District 27 schools. You could have a parent that sends their child to PS 100 or PS 64 and they have a completely different experience. That's real.
Subject near and dear to most of our hearts now. Property tax reform. We've known for a long time that the property tax system in New York City is badly broken. Some affluent neighborhoods pay less than poorer neighborhoods. One of the latest proposals is to actually reassess homes at full market value. If elected, how would you fix the system?
First off, no home should be at full market value when being assessed, because that's not what you're getting when you sell your home. It's not really what it's worth. And there is inequity in the tax system when it comes to taxes for our homes. You could have a home here in Queens that's worth $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and you're paying $4,000, $5,000, and $6,000 a year in taxes. Yet there are apartments in Manhattan or townhouses in Brooklyn that are paying half that, and they're worth 3 times as much as the houses here. What we need to do is we need to fight against this. We need to fight for equity in paying taxes, because we're not getting any more services than they are. In fact, we might be getting less. So a feasible tax structure for our homeowners taxes is really something that I will make a focus when I get to the city council. And the way we do that is working with our state elected officials, our city elected officials, and making sure that there is equity. There's been a lot of talk about Mayor de Blasio paying less taxes at his townhouse in Brooklyn than some of the smaller houses here in Queens. Maybe that's why. Maybe when this mayor leaves, the city council can have more of an effect. Because right now, the city council those who have common sense that are left in the city council, those who are taxpayers, like myself, paying property taxes on my condo, they know that there needs to be an adjustment. Because I know that, I'm going to fight extra hard for you. For my mother, who's 83 and is paying $5,000 or $6,000 in her taxes, and it just keeps going up, and she's on a fixed income because my father, God rest his soul, has passed, and whatever she has left has to last her until we sell the house. I don't want her to have to go into an apartment, a condo. I want her to be in her family home. I will fight for seniors so that they can stay in their home and they don't have to move in to their children's homes, so that they can afford to stay in the house that they bought that was their dream when they bought it. Those are the things that I want to fight for. Is it going to be an easy fight? No. But it's a worthy fight. It is a worthy one. And it is one that we can really move the needle on. Because there are enough people who have been outspoken about this, that City Hall, whoever the next mayor is going to have to listen. And we've listened to all of them talk on TV, and a lot of them say they're going to really address property taxes. When I get to City Hall, I'm going to make sure that I play that tape back and make sure that they keep to their word.
Yeah.
So, property tax is what is really, really making our landlords here, our homeowners in our community really, really feel crunched. And that adds to the feeling of being crunched to our renters in the community as well. 60% of this district are homeowners, 40% are renters. And they have a really important relationship in which they impact each other. You know, folks who own homes can't afford their mortgage, can't afford their property tax, then they have a harder time with making sure that they get that rent and that income from that rent to then pay that mortgage. But if renters can't pay their rent either, everyone's in a bind. So when we look at property tax in our city, number one, you know, the way we decide class 1, class 2 for property tax is actually determined by the state. City council has very few jurisdiction over property tax. Anyone who tells you any different is not being authentic. They're not telling you the truth. City council can, however, reform the formula in which we use to decide how much tax people are imposed on in regards to property tax. That's true. That's something we should definitely be fighting and pushing our mayor and our city council to do in this next coming cohort. Now, the things that damage our homeowners in this district and in our city is a couple of things. The first is tax lien. Tax lien sale gets placed on a house if you cannot pay your property tax and you cannot pay your utilities. And the city buys your home, they sell it to a trust. That trust then decides whether or not with that homeowner you have the ability to keep your home or it's going to be sold. Now, what ends up happening on the ground is predatory lending happens, especially to our elder community, who might want to stay in the home they were raised in and that they raised their families in, but can't because now they can't afford to. Predatory lenders, it's a city system where they list all of the homes across the city that have tax lien sale on them. The homes that have tax lien sale on them, it's public information. So predatory lenders then go to your home, they knock on your door, they say, hey, I'm so sorry this happened. You have a tax lien sale on your house. Let me help you by giving you this loan with 12% interest. And what happens to our elder community? What happens to our low-income community? They get into more debt. If you're gonna talk to someone who understands what it's like to lose their home, definitely talk to me, because I almost lost mine in the middle of the pandemic when my father had to file for bankruptcy and the United States Bankruptcy Court put a for sale sign on my home and threatened to evict me in 90 days. There is no system that saves people from that. I'll tell you, as someone who's navigated that system, it sucks. It's hard. So if there's one person who's gonna advocate for you keeping your home and talking about taxes, it's me.
15.
I'm done.
Sure, everyone realizes that affordable housing is in very short supply in New York City. Some people, including the mayor, want to legalize basement apartments. Considering the number of people who've died in basement apartments, especially this year, with floods, with fires, and things of that sort, as well as the lack of infrastructure that exists to support this kind of an initiative, and things like that, such as, for instance, parking availability, water and sewer systems, and other utilities. Do you think this is a wise move to legalize basement apartments?
Legalizing basement apartments and saying that you're in favor of it sounds pretty easy, but it's not. Legalizing basement apartments would take, you have to first see what is the community zoned for. Is it 1-family homes, 2-family homes? If it's 2-family homes, is it a 3-family home? Because that's what it would become if you had a basement apartment. You also have to worry about the safety of that. Is it a basement or is it a cellar? Is it completely underground, or is it somewhat underground with small windows? Is there two means of egress? I understand that people are struggling, especially coming out of the pandemic, and some who have lost their jobs, and more who have lost their jobs because of the mandate with the vaccine, and very difficult to make ends meet. But nothing should ever be legalized if it isn't safe. You cannot legalize basement and cellar apartments if they're unsafe for the inhabitants. And we learned that when we had people die in our communities who were electrocuted during a large rainstorm. Why? Because the infrastructure does not support it. Many of the communities have common sewer pipes. Couple that with the lack of maintenance for the catch basins, it's a recipe for disaster and flooding. Now, I'm all in favor of people making ends meet, but I'm not in favor of people not being safe and people dying. And we would need to really have codes changed. The Department of Buildings would have to come in and make sure it was safe. They would have to have the resources to do that. And if it is not a zoned area for 2 or 3 family homes, including the basement, then there would have to be zoning changes. It is not an easy fix. But as it stands right now, they're dangerous, and that was proven during the Storm Ida that we just had. We've always known, Community Board 10, Community Board 9, that these are always been dangerous. Fixing them is an entirely different issue. It is not an easy fix. It's worth taking a look at, but as it stands now, they've been proven to be unsafe for inhabitants.
So about 100,000 New Yorkers across the city live in basements. And whether they're legal or not, people are going to live in basements. For whatever reason it might be. Whether it's a family member who lives in your basement and rents from you for a small price, or someone you're actually renting to. What we need to do in protecting homeowners is make sure that basements are legal. Now, Chaya CDC, and I encourage you to look at their basement plan, is one that have thought about building codes and codes for neighborhoods based on the types of homes that are there. And they have a plan where you're rezoning and you're updating building codes. You're also providing assistance to homeowners who want to convert their basement to a legalized basement. And it will not be as costly as it is right now, where it's not legal and it costs thousands of dollars to legalize your basements. It was horrific to see so many lives lost during Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Sandy, of people who lived in basements. But what is better? A homeowner who's now potentially going to be charged with assisting this loss of life because their basement was illegal and they had someone in there? Or a homeowner who is protected, had a just transition to a legalized basement? I'm gonna go with this one. I'm gonna go with protecting homeowners and making sure they have a legalized basement. And now, not every basement can be legal. That's not how the systems work, right? We know that some basements just won't be able to be a code. People just can't live in them. So this basement program by Chaya CDC, an organization that's been around in our communities for a long time and works with homeowners and for homeowner equity, has a plan for basements and legalizing basements. That's the plan that I approve and that I want to see passed at the City Council, that includes the updating of zoning and codes and provides that financial security and assistance for homeowners who want to convert their basements, because you need to be protected, and we should be able to allow and offer people a chance to rent affordably and safely for everyone.
Unemployment in New York City is high, especially since this pandemic has hit us. Programs that increase the amount of unemployment benefits have helped a bit. However, there are thousands of jobs going unfilled because people don't want to go back to work. We see this on the news for the last couple of days especially. Our main ports are overcrowded because the ships can't be unloaded because you don't have enough truckers to take the stuff where it's got to go. If elected, what will you do in the council to get people back to work?
People have to want to go back to work. People have to be able to go back to work. We did see a lot of people not going back to work because they were receiving unemployment during the pandemic and then additional money from the federal government that actually at times they were making more than when they were working at their actual jobs. But now that's over. So what is stopping them from going in now? So what I think is stopping them now is because some don't want to be vaccinated, and there are vaccination mandates for certain jobs, restaurants, schools, government now is going to start. They'll start to impose mandates on unions. This is going to cause an overwhelming amount of further unemployment. And I have to tell you that I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm actually vaccinated, as is my family. But I think that that is part of the reason. And the other part of the reason is that people don't want to go back to work because the small business owners that have hired them, right, cannot hire all of them back because now they're at a lesser staff because they've been closed and shuttered for so long because of the COVID pandemic. And they have so many extra things that they have to pay for. They're paying more for their food that's coming in. And we've all seen it. We're paying a little bit more when we go to a restaurant, any of the restaurants. So they had to downsize their staff. We have to do better for people. We have to make sure that their rights are protected. We have to make sure that they are receiving a prevailing wage for the work that they're doing. We have to make sure that business owners are realizing grants and incentives that are out there, but they're not able to get because they cannot navigate the labyrinth of the documents that are sent to them, so they can rehire people who once worked for them. It is extremely important. And when elected, I will have a division in my office that helps small business owners do that. Fill out those forms and make sure that they can hire back the amount of staff that they had. I also don't think that the government should get in the way of people getting jobs back by giving them more money to stay home. That's never going to work. Now that unemployment for most has ended, I think we'll see a bit of a return to the workforce. But what I will tell you is that it's a huge problem. It is a problem that begins on the federal level. It drops down to the state level, and then the city council. But what you'll never hear from me is that it's not my job. It's not my job to fix this unemployment issue. It's not my job because it comes from the federal level or a state level. It is my job to advocate for you, to make sure that you have employment if that's what you want, and that jobs are readily available. And I think that begins with helping the business owners realize the grants and incentives so they can once again hire back.
I've definitely heard the thought or the perspective that people don't want to work even though there's an availability of jobs because they rather just stay on unemployment. And what that creates is the stereotype that some folks are lazy and some folks are ready to work. You know, coming out of a pandemic, your mental, physical well-being has completely changed whether you were directly impacted by COVID or you had a family member who was, or you know someone who passed from this terrible virus and disease. This is true for children, this is true for adults, these are people who have been at home and quarantined for so long, it's true for our elder community. There's a lot of mental health. This pandemic has put such a large toll on our quality and our mental health, our wellness. Going back to work and just waking up and just doing the thing is hard for some people. Now, the reason why people rather choose to stay on unemployment is because their job didn't pay them enough at the minimum wage, and employment actually paid them a lot more. You're able to afford more, some people who worked working class jobs at restaurants, jobs serving people. You're able to actually make more on unemployment than you were at your job at an hourly wage. So we need to push city legislators, state and federal, to raise the minimum wage. Stop paying people less for their work. That is why they're home on unemployment as well, because they were able to get more from government assistance than their actual job. And if you're confused by this, go and ask some corporations how much money they pay an hour for someone to deliver you a package when you order it off Amazon or UPS. Ask, and you'll know that it's maybe $10 to $12 an hour. And if you're a single mom, or you're someone that has multiple children, or you own a home, or you're a renter, let me know how you're able to sustain a living on $10 to $12 an hour, maybe. And maybe you get overtime. Some of these corporations that do have unions, and unions protect, and that's amazing, and they're fighting against corporations like UPS, which fired 10 employees in the middle of the pandemic. I was there, I'm on the picket line with them, fighting for their jobs back, and fighting for overtime they were promised in the middle of the pandemic and didn't get it. So yes, there is that rumor that people on unemployment don't want to go back to work, but guess what? 700,000 people or more also died from COVID, and they worked our labor jobs. And that's actually where we need employment. It's actually in labor jobs that don't pay enough for people to go back to them. We clapped at 7 o'clock every day for our service workers, and then now we don't want to pay them the amount they deserve? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So as an advocate, as a workers' rights advocate, I'm talking about increasing minimum wage. I'm talking about investing in climate jobs that have prevailing wage and protect workers. That's what we could do absolutely at the city level. That's what we need to be pushing state legislators to talk about and move towards. Because if we are going to reinvest in the economy, we need to reinvest in people.
One only has to turn on the 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news each night to see the people being shot every day. There seems to be a rash of senseless shootings. Why they do it, who knows? what do you think that city council should be doing to stop the flow of guns to the city and punish those who continue to harm others?
First, I'll tell you what we should not be doing. We should not be defunding them further $1 billion to put towards social programs. What we need to do is there are 3 mayoral candidates, what they're talking about doing, which is putting anti-crime back on the streets to do the job that they need to do, which is take illegal guns off the streets. Do they need to be retrained? Yes. Do they need to be a better anti-crime unit? Yes. But those are the units that took guns off the streets. I think it was the Daily News just a few weeks ago said, it had on the front page that 21 young people were shot. 21 young people. That's not including all the other people who were shot, killed. 21 young lives that will never realize who they could have been because of illegal guns in the hands of criminals. The only way to combat that is to have a specialized unit on the street that has a main focus to get guns off the street. As soon as anti-crime was disbanded, we saw an uptick in gun violence. We cannot turn on the television without finding someone was shot, shots fired, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds losing their lives being shot. Innocent bystanders. They weren't the intended target. Innocent bystanders. Because there's no one that the NYPD doesn't have a unit out there that is specifically for getting guns off the street. We cannot go on like this. We need a better anti-crime, we need a better trained anti-crime unit, but we need anti-crime back on the streets. And I believe that all 3 mayoral candidates agree with that as well.
Gun violence is one of the things that plagues communities across our city, especially our Black and brown communities. Just 2 weeks ago,
That's all communities.
Sir, please.
It's bullshit.
Bye. I lost my train of thought. But plagues Black and brown communities. It definitely plagues our Ozone Park community. We had a young boy named Brandon who was 20 years old, and I was actually shot outside of his home. It's definitely an issue, absolutely, and it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And as the Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate in this race, and Moms Demand Action members actually live in this district, I know that our solution to solving gun violence is actually multi-layered. It has to be. It must be. Because New York State already has the tightest and the strictest gun laws. So why is this still a problem? Well, multiple of reasons. One of them is the bringing in illegal weapons from across the state. Definitely. They're sold, they're moved around throughout our city. The second is we don't have a deep relationship and understanding with our communities and how violence escalates. Because when you look at gun violence, it happens in ways that are very random. We don't understand why someone was shot or why a young boy's life was taken when he was just standing outside of his stoop. And that's also the problem. We don't have people working in our communities, talking to community members, and actually stopping the escalation before it happens. All of these things can be prevented. Now, it's hard to imagine this because the way we've relied on preventing gun violence has been the same. And that's making sure our police are responding to gun violence that has already happened. The person's life has already been taken. That's it, it's done. But what if we start talking about preventing that from even happening? When I talk about crime prevention, it's having alternative methods to the already issued law enforcement. It's called an expansion from that. Violence Interrupters is a program in Brownsville. We share Pitkin Avenue with East New York, but one side of Pitkin Avenue is safer than the other. And the side that's not as safe is the one that's on East New York side. On my website, again at felicia2021.com/agenda, you will see that in the investment of violence interrupters, people who live in the community, who know community members, and have relationships with them already, who are employed and trained to de-escalate situations before they become violent, they saw a decrease in gun violence within 1 week of the program. And it's just about visibility. It's literally just about people outside of their homes talking to you and building relationships with you. There are communities across New York City that exist that don't have gun violence. You know why? Because they're invested in. They have resources. They have great school districts. Those communities exist already. So if we can use that as a model for our communities here in District 32, why not? Why not expand what public safety looks like? That means we're still using the same traditional resources, like calling the police if something gets extremely violent. Those things still exist. I'm talking about adding to it. That's all. We need to believe in that.
Bail reform, in its purest intention, was a good thing. Unfortunately, there are many who have taken gross advantage of it. People are being arrested, let out without bail, and continuing to commit crimes, knowing that they will not do any jail time. By the same token, there are politicians that advocate for the elimination of jail time totally, letting dangerous individuals back out onto the streets. What are your thoughts on bail reform and the elimination of incarceration?
Bail reform did have good intent, but it has been disastrous in its practical form. What we're seeing is recidivists, criminals who commit crimes over and over and over again, being brought before the judge, and the judge not having the discretion to set bail. So first we're going to say they know they can get away with the crime, so they continue to get away with the crime. And that lessens our quality of life. We have the systematic closing and decarceration of inmates at Rikers Island. They're coming back into the community. There's been no job training. There's been they haven't gone into a union's, initiative to become electricians. They came back out and went back to what they know best, which was committing crimes in our communities. And then they were arrested for those crimes, and it is a revolving door. And no one is more frustrated with this than the judges who are sitting on the bench. That's why they're advocating for more discretion when setting bail, especially for recidivists. You cannot take people who were violent criminals, put them back on our streets, diminish our police force, take away anti-crime. Bail reform makes the judge not have discretion to put them in jail or to set bail, and expect our quality of life to go back to what it should be. These are all issues that need to be resolved. Rikers Island needs to be fixed. We don't need community halfway houses where people who were convicted of crimes would live right in our neighborhoods. We don't need community prisons built in our communities. We need Rikers Island to be fixed. We're going into this next cycle in a major fiscal deficit because of the mismanagement of Bill de Blasio and the current city council. Where are they getting the money to build these prisons? They're not. They're going to wind up taking homes and call them halfway houses on your block and put the decarcerated criminals right in there. We cannot allow this to happen. You cannot and should not support someone who would support that. We need to give our judges more discretion, put funding and resources back to our NYPD, make sure that violent criminals are put behind bars where they belong. And then we will start to see our public safety getting better, and we will start to see our quality of life rise. Now, when they are in on Rikers Island, which is where they committed a crime, they were convicted, it's where they should be. They should receive job training. They should receive drug addiction services. They should receive mental illness programs to help them so that they can return and become productive members of society. But by taking a bus from Rikers Island and bringing them here and just kind of dropping them, and then no one knows what goes on after that, that is not doing us any favor, but maybe even more importantly, it's not doing that person a favor.
So City Council voted yes to closing Rikers within a 10-year span, but also unfortunately voted yes to community jails and prisons, and that's something I would not be a proponent of. Let me first start by explaining what bail is. Bail is set when someone has supposedly committed a crime, their trial hasn't been conducted yet, and the judge sets a bail. And that's how much money they need to give the city or give the judge or give the criminal court in order to then come back, to ensure that they come back for that trial. Now, people who cannot pay this bail sit in prison and wait for their trial. That's what bail, cash bail is. 85%, that's 85% of people who are in Rikers right now are just waiting for a trial to be charged either guilty or innocent by law. 85%. That means our tax dollars are housing people in Rikers to just wait for their trial. They haven't even been proved innocent or guilty yet. The problem with that, as we're seeing from our news coming out of Rikers, is inhumane things happening in that space. 12 people have died in Rikers. Correction officers don't even want to go to work, it's so bad. That is not a place that is fixable anymore. There was no mental health care in that space. It caused mental illness being in the space. People who are incarcerated are not getting their medication. They're not even getting food. It's an incredibly violent space. There's no rehabilitation in that space. And let me explain what recidivism is. Recidivism is when you release someone who's been formerly incarcerated and have served their time, and there is no system in our city that helps them get back in their feet. Why? Because when you apply to jobs, you have to check a box that says that you've been charged with a felony or you've been in prison. And that person hiring you doesn't want to hire you. That's one roadblock. The second is mental health services for that person. The third is job training. The fourth is finding a place to live, a housing crisis. So recidivism happens when the person then commits another crime and goes back to prison because they got food there, they got health care, and they had a place to live. That's what happens. So that's what our criminal justice system looks like today. And by the way, bail reform, that 2020 bail reform bill that had imposed no cash bail was rolled back. So now judges actually have the jurisdiction they need to impose cash bail on someone. In fact, I'm someone who went and watched a court watch the other day. That's public. You could go to Queens Criminal Court, say you're here to observe the court watch, and they let you in. And you sit there and you watch how much money judges impose on a person to make sure they come back for their trial. Research shows that people who are sent home waiting for their trial, more than 99% of them come back to court to make sure they get their guilty or not, their chance at being innocent. It's out there. We need to be able to make sure that we are a well-informed community about what bail reform is and what cash bail does to our communities and our tax dollars.
Homelessness. It's a very unfortunate consequence of modern society. The current solution by the city is to warehouse these unfortunate souls in shelters. We know that this is not a solution. Mentally ill and criminals make living in a shelter dangerous and even life-threatening at times. Shelters are put in neighborhoods without community input. Shelter residents roam neighborhoods like Woodhaven, committing crimes and sometimes even assaulting residents. If elected, what would you do to solve this situation for the homeless themselves and to actually eliminate homelessness?
You make an excellent point. Warehousing human beings is inhumane. It doesn't do them any justice. And in fact, if you ask homeless people, which I have, as we went, when I worked for the mayor's office and we went out and we had to try to get homeless people off the streets during the bitter cold of February and of January and February, they'd rather stay out and freeze to death than go into a shelter. Why? Because they don't feel safe. Because they don't want to be warehoused. So how do we lessen the population of the homeless? First, we identify the homeless that have mental illness and effectively treat them. City Hall and the mayor's office have failed miserably when it comes to treating the mentally ill population and the homeless population. There are also many drug addicts that are homeless. Why aren't we putting more programming dollars into chemical dependency units to help them detox, to help them not be on drugs anymore? I work for a hospital network that happens to have a chemical dependency unit. We work very hard there to make sure that anyone who comes to us for help, and oftentimes they are homeless, not only gets the treatment that they deserve, but the after services that they deserve. We need to put more money into that. Then you would see the homeless population shrink and become more manageable. And we need then to find affordable housing for them. But who first? Homeless families, children who were living in hotels. They deserve housing. And we have to have a better plan. There is no plan. For an administration that cries out, homeless for the homeless, we support the homeless. Guess what? They've done nothing for the homeless. Nothing at all. But turn them out onto the streets. And you can walk along Jamaica Avenue, Liberty Avenue, 101st Avenue, Cross Bay Boulevard. You can go on 116th Street on the Rockaway Peninsula and see poor souls, some of whom are just sitting and waiting the day out. Others who the president had mentioned are violent and aggressive. What does that do then to our small businesses that are along those particular strips? I'm not going to go and shop if I don't feel safe. But is it really their fault? No. Mentally ill people have problems. They're not problem people. People who have drug addiction have a disease, and they need to be treated like any other disease is treated. But we need to have more programs for them. They're not getting those programs while being sheltered in warehouses or in hotels like they were during COVID. If we can reduce the if we can provide health care to the population that needs it and reduce the population of the homeless, then we can properly address how to get them homes that they can move into and that are conducive to living and raising their families.
It's really, being unhoused can happen to anyone. It almost happened to my family. So anyone could be at risk of being homeless. And the thing that we need to think about the most is, one, making sure we have a really humane perspective of what it's like to live unhoused across our city and in our communities. The way right now our shelter system works is disgusting. It is not a system, it is a travesty actually. It's really terrible for folks who live within the shelter system. That's why they're outside of the shelter all day. That's why folks are sleeping on benches in our parks, because actually sleeping on a bench in our park is safer than sleeping in a shelter right now. That's how unsafe it is for community members. It's especially unsafe for folks who are youth, our LGBTQ population that sleeps in shelters, for women, and for men as well. You know, one of our largest stereotypes about our unhoused population are that we don't want men anywhere. And I can understand that, and I see that. But they are one of our largest populations who are unhoused as well, and are continue to be treated like chess pieces and moved around our city all the time, from shelter to shelter to shelter. That's why my plan that already exists in writing, and you can see it on my website, is to make sure we're pushing for affordable housing. I stood with folks who are unhoused to push the mayor to enact Intro 146. Intro 146 is an expansion of our voucher system. Right now, if you have a voucher, it doesn't even cover half the rent people have to pay across New York City. Rent is just too high to sustain, to have a job that helps pay for the other half and have that voucher. This voucher system that the mayor had proposed is supposed to make sure that people get a chance to live and stay in their rented property or wherever they're renting, and be able to afford to do that. The mayor definitely failed in his help for our unhoused population. Without a doubt, the administration could have done more and stood stronger. And in fact, that's why we're trying to push him to enact an intro he signed. A piece of legislation he signed already. And with this Intro 146, it also reduces the shelter capacity. So you can't have too many folks in a shelter system throughout the city. So when you make sure you're advocating for affordable housing, that looks like two ways at City Council. City Council's jurisdiction, one of our largest, is making sure we decide how public land is used. When we have public land across our city or in our district, we need to make sure affordable units are going there. And people are not waiting on long waiting lists to get into those affordable units either. That's why we need more. That's why private development is what is the leading causes of homelessness across the city, because you're pushing people out of neighborhoods for luxury condos and luxury buildings. You know, this aids to homelessness. The other thing that aids to homelessness is our lack of minimum wage. We need to move it up so people can sustain a livelihood and have a job if they have a place to live. We need job training. We need job services. We need social workers who are then placed with someone who has mental health issues and was unhoused to make sure we're checking on them consistently. When I think about how I solve problems, it's about a care economy and wellness. You need to be able to have a job. You need to be able to have a place to live. Money, minimum wage at least, and higher when it comes to transitioning back into a place, a life in which you are sustained. You're able to sustain, rather.
Probably one of the hottest issues today is police reform. There are strong views on both sides of the fence. The gamut on reform runs from reallocating resources within the department to increase its effectiveness, to taking money away from the NYPD's budget and giving it to local groups to establish different services that they feel would decrease criminal behavior in their neighborhoods, to fully eliminating police in favor of social service workers. What are your views on this issue?
What is the old saying? You can't take a knife to a gunfight, right? So when you have a violent situation, that often happens in domestic violence situations, although social workers have a place, it is not in the dangerous situation of responding to a violent situation that's been called in for 911. You speak about two different ideologies. One, return resources. One, take away further resources. I would like to return resources to the NYPD so that they can do their jobs effectively. And that would include retraining and having them be more culturally sensitive when they are out patrolling in different areas with different ethnic backgrounds. That is very important. But we cannot have another layer for the police to have to now protect in having social workers respond to violent incidences. Now, NYPD has done a tremendous job with negotiating. There were 2 instances recently where a detective at the 106 negotiated with someone they were in a violent situation, and she was able to stop that by negotiating with him, talking to him, making sure, and that was completely resolved without any violence. Right after that, there was an incident where a person wanted to hurt themselves, and the 102 precinct responded. They spoke with that person, and that person is alive today. Why? Because they're already trained in conflict. Now, if you want to add a social worker component, that's great. But let's have them be NYPD. Let's make it a special unit. They're social workers, yet they're trained in conflict negotiations. I think that's something that we should think about. Because then they would have what they need to protect themselves and others in a situation, yet have the skills to diffuse. And oftentimes, officers, especially our NCOs, our neighborhood coordination officers, our YCOs, our youth coordination officers, are out there doing prevention of crime. Police don't only respond to crime, they prevent crimes. I have spent decades building relationships between the community and the NYPD, as many of you have here in this room. Those relationships are real. That's what we need to do. We need to now, once again, rebuild those relationships. But we can't do that with a police force that's been really depleted because their resources have been depleted.
15.
We need to return resources to our NYPD in the areas that make us safe, such as domestic violence, because I know that those officers go back and check on that family and make sure that everything is right. They are negotiators, they are conflict negotiators, and they do prevent crime. They don't just respond.
I have been talking about domestic violence since my primary run with the other Democrats. In fact, I'm so glad that all of my plans, like equity, like domestic violence, like social workers, are now something all of my opponents are talking about. I'm glad I've been able to move them that way. In the fiscal year of 2021, the first quarter, 100 precinct, 102 and 106 saw increase in DV reports by 50% or higher. And then in the fiscal year of 2021, second quarter, they saw them go up even more. This is public information on our government website. You can look it up there. And what that tells me as someone who works in gender justice and knows people who've been harmed by violent partners is that the way we respond to domestic violence incidents is just not enough. When I talk about public safety, I'm talking about expanding what we already have and doing more to keep us safe, not relying on one system to keep us safe. That's already overwhelming for that one system. Our police respond to blocked driveways, abandoned cars, trash on the road, random situations where tree limbs fall from trees and hit cars or hit people because trees haven't been trimmed, because 311 doesn't work for our city in the way that it should. Our police force are overwhelmed with the amount of things they have to respond to, and now my opponent's plans are just to give them more work to do, not expand safety, but give them more. You know, in fiscal year budget 2021 to 2022, that's the budget that whichever one of us wins, we have to deal with. We can't move it, we can't change it. Law enforcement got $200 million in a $5.4 billion budget. It's public information, look it up. I'm not making this up. So they got more money, and they've always had a budget around $5.4 to $6 billion, and still we have a rise in crime. So what I'm looking at here, what I'm asking you is like, how much more money should law enforcement have until we have no crime? Should they have the $100 billion?
20 seconds.
So what I want us to think about is how we can be innovative as a community. to change the way people feel safe and feel seen, because not everyone feels safe and feels seen when law enforcement report. Some people do, and that's okay. But for those who don't, we need to have other alternatives. And that is what I'm asking for us to invest in. That's where we're smartly spending on our taxes. That's how we take care of our communities. Communities exist that don't have crime, or don't have violent crime. And we need to be able to use that as a model. Why? Because they spend their tax dollars in a way that is fiscally savvy. That is what I want to do in City Hall.
Question period. I'm sure you're all relieved. Each of the candidates will have 5 minutes for their closing argument, closing statements, and any rebuttals they might wish to make.
Oh, we're not switching over for first, since I went first?
You can.
Oh, it's up to you.
It's up to you.
Go ahead.
I think that a lot was discussed here tonight, and I applaud the questions that were asked. And I think that you can see tonight that there's a clear difference between my opponent and myself. What the differences are begins with experience and knowledge, and what's feasible, and what I've heard you say, and what I've put into my platform. My platform is not a 50-page playbook from the ultra-left. It is what you've told me you want. It is that you want more funding for the police, and that you don't want further defunding. So if you want that, then I'm the candidate that you would want to vote for. But if you want injection sites in your community, and you want halfway houses for criminals in your community, and you want specialized high schools, SHSAT, the gifted and talented programs in our schools removed, then you would want to vote for my opponent. My opponent does not exude what you want. She exudes what the movement wants. And that was clear when AOC and Tiffany Caban endorsed her. And when I received endorsements from Democratic Councilmember Bob Holden, Eric Ulrich, your current council member, all of law enforcement, our first responders, the unions, buildings, trades, laborers, Teamsters, all working class, tax-paying unions. Because they believe that I will fight for them. Just like I know that I will fight for you. Why? Because I have a proven history of it. I didn't just show up. I have been a community leader, a civic president, attended civic meetings, made sure that we fought with whoever the council member was, whoever the mayor was, that so we would get the services that we need. These are things that I've already done on a volunteer level. I want to do that for you in City Hall. I want to make sure that you get all the services you need, whether it's Department of Sanitation, the Department of Environmental Protection, Parks Department. I want to make sure that you're receiving. I want to make sure that 311 is more accountable to you when you make a call. They don't just close out your case when you know the condition still exists. I want to have a relationship with the NYPD when I call. Do you think my opponent, after she further defunds them $1 billion, which is her plan, you can check on her webpage, did you think she'll have that relationship? Maybe there'll be no one there to talk to. Is that what you want? No. We want to be able to stay here. We don't want to be able to, we don't want to have to flee. We don't want to have to go to Florida. We don't want to have to go to the Carolinas. We love Woodhaven. We love every area of the 32nd Council District. And what you have with me is someone who, like you, is deeply rooted in civic. And when you look at elected officials, honestly, who really are tremendous advocates at City Hall, They're deeply rooted in civic associations. There was a tweet just before saying that, I say that there's, a lot of trash cans, and there was a dirty street that my opponent put on Twitter. But that dirty street was in Ozone Park, where she lives, where she sat for a few months on the Our Neighbor Civic Association. Why, as a community advocate, wouldn't she put a cleanup together? Why does she take a picture of it just to slam me as her opponent? I don't do that when we're cleaning the Center Mall, when we're cleaning at the beaches, when we're cleaning at the parks. We do it because we want a beautiful community.
20 seconds.
I have the experience necessary to do this job. I have the relationships necessary to get the job done. And if you give me the great honor of being your city council person, I will not let you down. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, to the Woodhaven Block. I appreciate it for hosting this forum. This is the best way that civics or our community members could stay engaged in who's running and what they stand for. My plan, albeit very long.
Folks, please.
Oh, he's on the phone.
Oh, sorry.
My plan is really long. It's long because it's very well thought out. You go to my opponent's website, you see no plan. You know who that's dangerous for? All of you. Because all the things she said she wanted to give you, you have no evidence of. Zero. And so that's why plans are important. In fact, I have plans in 3 different languages, Spanish, Bangla, and in English on my website. So people who live in our communities and speak other languages can access them and understand them in their preferred language. That's really important. That's someone who's thinking about community in all its shapes. I served in our Neighbor Civic Association. I served the United States in the Peace Corps. I came back and I served our community as a civic leader, as someone who led the census, someone who helped people apply for their citizenship, someone who registered people to vote, someone who was a full-time teacher, coming home and changing my clothes, getting my books ready to go to a civic meeting every single night, community board meetings, because I care about the community that raised me. You know how I stayed here? I stayed here because when my sister was 8 years old, she was diagnosed with cancer, and we were renters at the time. We lived right next to Ozone Park on 95th Avenue. And my parents couldn't afford to maintain the rent because my mom was at my sister's bedside and my dad was driving his taxi whenever he could. And our community knew our struggle, and our community fundraised to help us offset bills. That is what a community does. The reason I'm here today is because of my community. I'm that little girl that Joe Adabo, Senator Adabo, who was our council member at the time, spoke about at that fundraiser, and that Lou Simon ran that raffle for. I'm that little girl. I'm literally the girl that was raised in Ozone Park and is running for office to serve my same district. That's who I am, at my heart and in my soul. When we think about our community and when we think about experience, I want anyone to know who's sitting here right now, whether you're a carpenter or a teacher or a single mom, you can run for office. You don't need quote unquote experience to do it. My opponent has been running for office since 1996 and has lost every election. So it's not about experience. It's about desire. It's about intent. My intent is where the people are. During my Democratic primary, we spoke to 20,000 people at the doors. We called 50,000 people on the phones. You know what people ask for? Simple things that should have been fixed yesterday. Potholes, trees need to trim, the streets are dirty. I'm really tired of putting reports into 311 and no one getting back to me. That is what City Council can do, make your quality of life better. That is the largest jurisdiction of power we have. And for the last 12 years, under Republican leadership, we've been left to deal with it. Doing community cleanups is excellent. I've hosted so many in Rockaway, in Ozone Park, everywhere in our community. And that's great that our community cleans up. That's great, but our city agencies should be working to do that too. That's where our tax dollars go. We need more trash cans. That's what we should be demanding from our city council member. So if you want more of the same, like Eric, then go ahead and vote for my opponent. But if you want something more, something that's led with joy and courage and something with bold policy, vote for me, because I don't have to scare you into voting for me. You're voting for me because change is possible. Because I came back to my community after serving the United States and in China for 2 years, and I've served this community my entire life. Since I was 13, I've lived here. I've served the community. I was born and I was raised in Ozone Park. And this is the importance about having an elected official who knows and understands what our city agencies should be doing for our community and what it's not. And an advocate in City Hall who's going to do just that. And by the way, of course Democrats across the city are going to endorse a Democrat. I have endorsements from Senator Chuck Schumer, Assemblymember Catalina Cruz, Assemblymember Khalil Anderson. In fact,
10 seconds.
Democrats across the city and the state know how important this race is, and they wouldn't have been looking here had I not been running. So what's at stake here is you can get more of the same, or you can get something different and better. It's your choice. Thank you.
Wow, very enlightening evening, huh? I want to thank both candidates, Felicia, Joann. We really appreciate taking the time to come and visit our community and tell us where you are. It'll help everybody, I think, make a much more informed vote when they go to the polls starting next week. Remember, early voting starts next week, and regular voting will be in November. One other thing I just want to say before we leave,